Hello, everyone. Welcome to the August meeting of Integration Down Under. Tonight, I'll just go through a couple of quick slides and then we'll get started. So again, just go through the organizers. We have Martin, Dan, Renee, Wagner, and myself. And tonight we have Martin Abbott, who's going to talk about looking over the intelligent edge, the Microsoft Azure IoT Edge. From that point, I think we will pass it over to Martin. Let me just change presenter and Martin can get started.
Can you see your screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Awesome stuff. All right, let me just get it going then. Make sure my function keys lined up. Right. So, yeah, thanks for that, Bill. I thought, because basically, IoT Edge was made generally available a few weeks ago, and I've been having a little bit of play with it. And I did a presentation similar to this a couple of weeks ago, so I thought I'd just run back through it to a degree and run a relatively straightforward demo, which we'll get to at some point. So I think probably everybody knows me. Aaron, I think you're on the call, so I think you know me pretty well. So that's me. This picture was the weekend just gone in Bustleton, where it was blowing a gale. It was literally blowing a gale. So I thought I'd share just the experience of being down by the sea when it's blowing a gale. If you need to contact me, that's my Twitter handle and my email address. Please do. I'm always willing to talk about anything we can think of. It's actually just started raining here, so hopefully that won't impact the sound too much, and we'll just move on. So when I was thinking about IoT Edge, I thought what I'd do is I'd talk about Edge generally, so the why of Edge, how Microsoft have solved it with the tool that they created, and then I thought I'd go on and do a demo. So that's kind of how the structure of this presentation is going to go. So firstly, let's think about the shift to the edge. So we've heard of the cloud, right? We all know about the cloud. So it's this globally available, unlimited, infinite, call it what you like. It's limited, obviously, but unlimited compute resources that are available to sign up for and do whatever we will. Next thing along off the rank was IoT, obviously as a result of the commodity formatting of the cloud compute and cheaper sensors. It's become a lot easier to roll out IoT projects. But of course, the issue with IoT and the big thing about IoT is the I in IoT, which stands for the internet, of course, and sometimes you don't want to have the need to push data directly out into the cloud. So that's led to the idea of doing things maybe closer to where the actual problem is. So think about this in the old days. This might have been a SCADA system and a process control network. That's kind of an edge device or an edge solution by default. But this is really talking about taking stuff that we would normally do in the cloud and pushing it out to the edge. And of course, one of those things would definitely be some form of intelligence. So whether that's intelligence through machine learning models, through intelligent action as a result of processing something through a machine learning model, or even if it's just something like low levels of compute, we can still do all of that sort of stuff at the edge. So that's, I guess, why some of this may have been going on. Let's build the slide out. So the interesting thing about it is both of these problems have barriers, and they are broadly very different as well, really. So you look at typical IoT scenarios with cloud, you get a lot of data. You know, there's, depending on how many Vs you want to listen to in terms of big data, is it 3, is it 5, is it 7? I've seen 42 Vs as well in the past, but there's a lot of Vs, whether that's volume, variety, and so on. But there's a lot of data, and you need to be able to not only store, but transport that up to the cloud. And because of that, well, not really because of that, because there are solutions to real-time insights, but typically with those large volumes of data, you're doing large amounts of compute across vast quantities of data to gain insights. The edge really has always traditionally been the realm of your electrical engineers. So, you know, they're a highly developed group of people building stuff, knowing how to solder wires, that sort of thing. You'll tend to get very, very good embedded developers who have got a very strict and rigid skill set. And for the most part, You build them, you fabricate them at the factory, you ship them out to site, and there's very, very manual implementation at site. Maybe that's plugging in a serial terminal to update some information. Maybe that's just plugging it in and hoping it works. So just to talk through what the difference is between these two in terms of scenarios, but also some of the things that they address generally. So anybody who's done any of the stuff in Azure so far around IoT will have heard of the remote monitoring solution in IoT. It's one of the pre-configured solutions that you can spin up. Very popular as an entry point to start playing around with IoT, but it's a fairly typical scenario as well. So the ability to have a large fleet of devices that you're looking at and monitoring and seeing what's going on. Of course, we've talked about big data already, so there's definitely an aspect of being able to merge all that data plus other data sources together, be that weather data, be that traffic information, be that whatever you like, to gain some kind of insight. And we can do that because we can leverage the cloud. So that's one of the things I've already mentioned. So we are able to use infinite compute and storage. I really love the term infinite. I love the way that's thrown around. Large levels of compute and storage to train machine learning, and we've got basically the grunt there to do it. Skip over to the edge, and really that's talking about, as it says, low latency tight control loops. What does that mean? That means that essentially if you have to make a decision and act on that decision, maybe it's a decision that's based on something that could be a danger to life, like overpressure on a valve or something like that, then you don't want to have to really rely on sending that data up to the cloud over the internet. Remember, the Internet of Things, the I is the dodgy part, over the internet, waiting for it to be processed and then get an answer back, because by then you could have had a catastrophic event. Another aspect to the edge is that quite often you'll find, particularly in older systems, you'll get very specific technology that connects the devices to the edge device. Maybe that's Modbus, maybe that's RS-232. The current darling is of course OPC UA, which is definitely a standard. But those are great, but IoT Hub doesn't talk those protocols and that language. So you have to be able to translate from that to something that IoT Hub can talk, whether that's HTTP, please don't do that, AMQP or MQTT. So that's another reason. And of course, the other thing is privacy and protection. So you can imagine that you might not want to send all of the data that you're gathering at those devices up to the cloud. Maybe you don't need to send all of it because actually some of it's either private, some of it needs to be uploaded through some other tertiary channel. And really all you want to do is minimize the data that you're sending, because maybe your data charges are high, maybe you only want to send a small packet of data just because you want to hide some of the information that's already there. So that's all well and good, and they're typical scenarios for where you'd use IoT. But the problem with it is you don't want to have to think about these things in isolation and work with them in isolation. What you really want is to have some kind of symmetry between these two types of IoT. Enter Azure IoT Edge. So this has been something that originally started out as kind of like a gateway product or project within Microsoft, and over time has been moved forwards. But has always had kind of this grand vision, which is probably pretty much laid out on the right hand side of this slide, and really that's about, as it says, moving cloud and custom workloads to the edge. So we'll run through some scenarios or an example of doing a module and some stream analytics at the edge. But really it can support so much more than that, and you can build your own modules, of course. So seamless deployment of AI and analytics. I'm going to get to how this all works when I actually do the demonstration. But basically, the idea is that, or when I go further through the presentation, big one, the idea behind it really is about finding a way that you can store these components in a way that allows you to deploy them all very easily out to your fleet of devices. Which touches on the third point, really, configure, update, and monitor. So you want to be able to do this, but you don't want to have to go out to the devices in order to do it. So what you want is a control plane that allows you to manage your fleet of devices, allows you to manage deployments of these pieces of compute to those devices, and you want to monitor it because, of course, there's no point in deploying these things if you don't know how they're performing. Compatible with popular operating systems, so Linux, there is some degree of real-time operating system as well, and Windows 10, of course, or Windows 10 IoT, they're all supported. Code symmetry, so this comes back to that symmetry that I was talking about. You don't want to have to learn how to write code for an IoT device, so a typical IoT device, which may be a sensor, and an IoT edge device. You want to be able to use the same code and your same skills so that you don't have to get different staff and reskill the staff that you already have. And finally, of course, you have to be secure, because there's no point in having an IoT solution that isn't secure. And I don't think I need to dwell on that, because we can all imagine the scenario, can't we, where you can send in a poison message and do some serious damage to some back-end system. Not atypically in the world of Edge, the world tends to split in much the same way as it does everywhere else, where you have developers and operators, and you also have a DevOps story, which I'll come to in a little while. But the typical personas, as you can see there, you might find the developers do their similar stuff that they always do, develop. It's very heavily tied into VS Code, Visual Studio Code. There's some great extensions for using it in Visual Studio Code. And obviously you can continuously integrate when you deploy the stuff back up to the STS. Talk about that in a minute. From an operator perspective, that's where we say we want to be able to do this in the cloud, right? So we want to be able to not only manage the devices, but let me just take a drink, but be able to deploy at scale. We'll talk about that very briefly when we do the demonstration. And create alerts. So all of these things that you can see on the operator side and on the developer side should be very familiar to anybody who's done any IoT device development so far on Azure, because actually, as I say, it talks back to that symmetry, making sure that everybody can do the same thing as everybody else. So let me just build this slide out. So, of course, all these things are great, but what you don't want to have to do is just hand crank all this stuff yourself. So rather nicely, as Microsoft tend to do, they've helped create a bunch of SDKs that provide support for a bunch of languages. You can see there in the middle. They've provided, because they realized that just sending stuff out as a piece of compute isn't enough. We want to do a lot more than just that. So the original gateway idea was about protocol translation and very basic compute on the edge. But of course, we all know that the edge and the term intelligent edge requires a lot more than that. So we can see here over the left-hand side, machine learning, stream analytics, Azure functions, all those run out on the edge. And I'll be talking about stream analytics and functions specifically. And your own code, of course, so you can write your own modules. There's, again, an SDK to help you do that. Again, the whys on the right-hand side, bandwidth issues, downtime by taking real-time action at the edge. And of course, the main thing is that symmetry, again, leveraging your existing resources. So let me just build this slide out again. There we go. So at its heart, IoT Edge is a runtime agent that runs on a device. So you can see that here, and essentially that runtime agent, that Azure IoT Edge runtime, is responsible for all the stuff there that you can read, right? But it maintains security. It does the communication in and out of IoT Hub to make sure that the components are up to date and running correctly. It reports module health, of course. That's a big part of that. But overwhelmingly, it also does all the comms. So that's what the agent does. And when we create a device, which we'll do in a little while, you'll see that it's the key critical part of the solution, because that agent is essentially the plumbing that allows components to talk to each other and pass messages between each other and talk back up to IoT Hub. So just looking at that diagram, you can see just roughly what's going on there. We'll just expand that out in terms of how that works. So you've got devices throwing stuff onto the IoT Hub, IoT Edge runtime. There's a module that's processing some of that. That's passing it on to an insight type module. That could be maybe stream analytics or a function, or it could be a machine learning model. Also functions at the end. So that's performing some kind of action. Maybe that's resetting something. Maybe that's doing something else. And then eventually it's sending out to the hub. So So you can see there that really you've got these components that send messages in and out of this runtime, and that allows them to communicate. So essentially, you could almost argue, and this is an integration crowd after all, you could almost argue that that IoT Edge runtime is kind of like a service bus or a message bus with a bunch of subscriptions. So you've heard me talking about components, but what actually is a component? Well, the parlance that's used inside IoT Edge is a module. So essentially, a module is a package. It's something that you create which contains code that essentially defines what you want to do. An instance is, so that's the module image. An instance is, obviously, as you can probably guess, is an instance of that image on a specific device. You can have an identity, so that allows you to pass information to and from the device from a security perspective. And then anybody who's done anything with the old IoT Edge, the IoT devices will be probably familiar with a device twin. But essentially what this does, this allows you to have some form of mechanism by which you can communicate with a device when the device is not connected. So you have this concept of properties and tags, or desired properties and reported properties. So desired properties are what you want to set on a device, reported properties are what a device has reported back after it's done something. Modules work exactly the same way. So again, I'm going to keep hammering this point home, symmetry. So you have a module twin. So that is broadly equivalent to the device twin that you would have seen in the old days of a device, or current days of an IoT device. And then, of course, there's a bunch of SDKs to help you do that. So if we just to think about just a very simple scenario here, so as you can see here, find insights in the cloud from telemetry sent from a device that does not speak an internet-ready protocol. So again, this goes back to what I was saying. Maybe this is a binary protocol that is proprietary, that has been written because we need to minimize bandwidth between the device and a gateway. Maybe this is an RS-232 connection, talking over a COM port. Maybe this is Modbus. Maybe this is a bunch of other protocols that are used. So we may have our IoT Edge device and we've got the runtime running on there. So we may create a module, protocol ingestion it's called here, but essentially that is something that can interpret the inbound message. So maybe that's reading from a COM port. What it's then doing is it's then, let's build this out, it's then publishing that to the, or in fact, in this case, we're not publishing it to the Edge runtime. We're just moving that straight to another module, which is doing some data formatting, and then that data formatting is publishing it onto the runtime and publishing the telemetry up. So actually, that could have just as easily, the protocol ingestion could have done something, pushed it onto the runtime. The data formatting module could have read that, pushed it back onto the runtime, and then sent it up to the cloud to do something very, very interesting, I'm sure, in the cloud. So that's a module. So that's the, if you like, the unit of compute that runs something on the IoT Edge runtime. But you've heard me say that it's like a bus, the runtime. So how do we get messages from one place to another place on the bus? Well, this uses essentially a route. So I've built this out so you can see it just makes it a lot easier. So you have this concept of modules which have inputs and outputs, and you have essentially a very, very simple query language. So from source, where condition equals something, into some kind of output. And just an example there, if we just go down to the bottom one, because it probably makes a little bit more sense. So it's saying from messages that are coming out of a module called mod1 on its output, and that says, the star there says all outputs. So it's saying from module 1, all messages that come out of outputs where the sensor type equals temperature, I want you to pass on to module 2 into its in1 input. So what that broken endpoint is that broken endpoint is saying that the IoT Edge runtime is managing that endpoint and is essentially using that almost as a subscription. So think of it that way, almost as a subscription. The curious one is you'll see the dollar upstream. What dollar upstream it says, so if you send anything into dollar upstream, you're basically saying send this to IoT Hub. So you can route messages that, like I say, they just work as subscriptions. So you can have things coming out, going into other modules, or coming out and going straight up to IoT Hub. And you can have a mixture of all of those things. So that's pretty powerful. So it means you can pass things between modules. It means you can make decisions. And based on decisions, because you can got a query language there. You can just decide to pass on certain modules. So it allows a great deal of flexibility in terms of message passing on that essentially message bus that is the Edge runtime. So how does it work, as conceptually at least? And we'll probably run, we will run through this process as well. So you've heard me talk about components and you've heard me talk about modules. The big giveaway really here on this slide is where it says container registry. So obviously we all know that Docker is one of the darlings at the moment, and it won't be any great surprise to understand that one of the core concepts of the module is that actually it's running as a Docker container, or it's actually running as a Moby container, and I'll come to what that means when I do the demo. But essentially it's running as a container. But of course, because we have to be able to have a large fleet of devices that are provisioned, or edge devices that can be provisioned as a result of just general IoT edge device management, we need somewhere to store them. So that's where the container registry comes in. So that's basically just an Azure container registry that stores your components. So first off, we'll provision something in IoT Hub, and that's really just the same as provisioning a normal device. It's just a very, very simple process which gives it a name and creates a device string, a connection string. We'll then start building out our solution where we'll define modules that define that we want to run on specific devices. And because this also can use the configuration service, we can set this up so as we can push specific modules to a specific set of devices rather than to all devices. And that set of devices can be based on properties such as tags. So you can see here container-based workloads, that's what I've just mentioned. And we see again, AI services, functions, stream analytics, machine learning, and your own code. So once we define what modules we want, we have to define those routes. So that's just a very, very simple piece of JSON that defines how messages flow on the bus, on the Edge runtime. If we want to configure any module twins, and we will see one example of this in the demo, if we want to see a module twin or configure module twin, we do that as well. And then once we've got all those things done, so we've said what modules we want to do, we've said what routes we want to pass those for the message passing, we want to set up those modules to be set up in a specific way when they start up, we can then push that information out to the Edge. And it really does work in near real time if we have a decent internet connection in my office, which I'm really, really hoping we do. I'm actually sat next to the router, so fingers crossed we will. But it doesn't stop there. There's also, obviously we live in a DevOps world, there is also already a Visual Studio Team Services task specifically to allow you to build these modules and push them out to the Edge. So that stuff is already in place. They've done a really good job of making sure that all this stuff is in place even before you've started doing any development. But of course, all this is very good, but what we also want to do is make sure we can make some money on what we're doing, right? So we always want to do that. So currently, these are the three modules that you can get in a marketplace. But the idea is that over time, people will build modules. People are already building modules for things like protocol translation, of course, that's a fairly obvious one. But machine learning modules, that'd be a pretty obvious one as well that you can configure based on a module twin. So that could be things like computer vision ones that you can configure based on a module twin to look at specific things. So all those sort of things that are the art of the possible absolutely should be made available through a marketplace, either for monetary gain or for free and for community effort. So the marketplace already exists. These are the three that are already there. I'll be probably looking at the first one and the third one on this screen, which leads me rather nicely to the demo. So I think I'm about halfway through. So this demo can take about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So hopefully we should be done in about an hour. Any questions yet so far, Bill? I'll take that as a no. Right, so
sorry, I had my mic muted. So no, there's no question so far.
Fantastic. That either means that people have already switched off, or I'm doing a fantastic job at explaining. So we'll assume it's the latter. Right. So what I thought I'd do is I'd go into the portal experience first. So anybody who's done a lot of stuff or even just to play around with IoT, Azure IoT, will be familiar with this screen, which is the IoT devices screen. You can see I can add devices, refresh and delete. You may be less familiar with the device configuration screen, which allows you to essentially stamp a certain configuration across a fleet of devices. So that's this screen. Why am I showing you these? Because what do I keep saying? Oh, it's that word symmetry, right? So if I go into IoT Edge here, we'll see add IoT device, and we'll see add IoT Edge deployment. Now it's all in one control plane rather than in separate control planes like it is for the devices themselves. But we can see that if I go into deployments here, target condition, priority, system metrics, so on and so forth, all looks very, very familiar, right? So anybody who's already had a play with the IoT Hub stuff from a device perspective should get this pretty quickly. But what I thought we'd do would just very quickly create a device. So I've already created a VM, and this is it here. So this is just a Linux VM. So I've called it IoT Edge. Just don't worry about why I called it that. It's just what I did. So because I have deep levels of OCD, I'm going to call my device the same. So I'm just going to create that device in much the same way as I would any other device. And when I click add, it only takes a second and it adds that device. So we'll just go in there and have a look at that. So here we have a device, and you'll see it's got an IoT, or it's got an Edge agent and an Edge hub. Now, right now, the Edge hub won't do anything. So the Edge hub is what does the communication in and out of IoT hub, but the Edge agent is essentially that IoT Edge runtime that we've been talking about. But of course, right now we haven't done anything. All this has done is created the device in the device registry. So if we hop out to our device here, what I've done already in here is I've already installed Moby. So Moby is an engine that is essentially a very lightweight framework from Docker that runs Docker containers. It can run a few other things as well, but it's just a really, really lightweight engine. And what that means is essentially you don't have all the overhead of running the full Docker engine. So of course you can imagine that on smaller or more constrained devices where you may have slightly lower memory, that you may have only 1 or 2 gig of memory, you might be running this on a Raspberry Pi, which has only got 512, right? So at that point you need to make sure that you're playing nice with memory constrained devices. So I've already installed the Moby engine on here. So what I'll do is it's very, very simple. I'll just go ahead and install the IoT Edge runtime. So it's very, very simple. I'll just do this here, IoT Edge. And off it goes, or it will do, once I tell yes. So much the same way as this always does, it's just your package explorer, and we get a nice helpful message. Important, please update the configuration file. That is because right now what we've done is we've installed the engine, or the IoT Edge runtime rather, but it's got no ability to communicate in and out of IoT Hub. So if we flick over to IoT Hub here, we'll see that I've got a connection string. So I'm just going to copy that, go back to my device, and it even tells me what I need to edit. So if we just do sudo nano slash etc slash, oops. Then we can see if we just scooch down here, we can see a device connection string. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm obviously adding the connection string, and I'm wiring up, essentially that's what this is going to do, I'm wiring up this device to talk to IoT Hub. So you can imagine that if you are doing this from the perspective of a normal IoT device, you'd probably run some code, maybe some Python code, which creates a device client. This is kind of sort of doing that, but from that device, or from that Edge agent perspective. So we'll just save that file. So what we've done is we now added that, but we need to actually start the process. Now, essentially, IoT Edge runs as a system daemon. Who would we prefer, daemon or daemon? I've always been a daemon man, so there you go. So it runs as a system daemon. So we'll just start that daemon. And if we now just look at the status of that, we can see it's running. Fantastic. So that looks like it's all worked. So if we go back to our device back here, click refresh, then it can take a little bit of time before it reports. So we'll just let it think about that for a second. But we'll go back to the device in the meantime and just run through some of the more interesting commands that we can do here. Probably the most interesting one really is list. So it's still not been provisioned yet. We can see that. So essentially what's happened is it's started, but it's not provisioned the agent yet because the agent doesn't exist on this device yet. So essentially I'm running the runtime, but it hasn't installed the agent. So there you go. So it's now installed the agent. That's up and running. So essentially that's been pulled down. If we click a refresh there, hopefully we should get something that says it's running very shortly. Well, we'll leave it to its own devices. But so right now, all that's happening is that device, let's go back to the device there, is just running that agent and nothing else. So essentially what that's now doing is it's got the runtime, the agent is installed, and it's ready to start playing nice. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go and just add a temperature sensor module. Now this is something that you saw has already been written, so I'm not doing anything clever here, and in fact this entire demo is really just running through the basic tutorials that are on the IoT Edge documents on docs.microsoft.com. Why am I doing that rather than doing something clever and interesting? Because I thought I'd show you how easy it is. Really, that's the main reason. Because actually, none of this is hard if you've done some of the IoT Edge, the IoT Dev stuff before. So, how do we add modules? Well, that's pretty straightforward. So we go up to the set modules here. Click Add. It's looking remarkably easy so far. So if we say Add IoT Edge module, you can see here we got Stream Analytics and Machine Learning as well. I'm going to do an Edge module. This one has already been written. So I'm just shamelessly copying this. So if I do temp sensor, I can't remember the image URI off the top of my head. So I'm going to go to my little cheat sheet here and just grab that. So this is basically using Microsoft's own Azure Container Registry, where they've just published this particular module to. I can do a bunch of other things in here. So restart policy, always, desired status, running. Obviously that's an obvious one. I can enable the device twin and start setting properties if I really want to. And I can set a bunch of other stuff, which we'll go into when we do a more in-depth session at some other point. Click Add, and we think, oh, is that all now done? No, it's not quite, because what we need to do is we've said what the modules are, but we haven't told it what to do with the messages that flow. So this is where the routes come in. So remember that slide where I showed how we provision a device and what we need to do in order to get it working? So this is just the only route that is created. It's saying all messages I want to send to IoT Hub. That's basically what that is saying. Click Next, and we get basically a manifest. And we'll just quickly wander through here very quickly. We've got the Edge agent, that's already installed. We need the IoT Hub, because that's what's going to communicate in and out of IoT Hub. That's the IoT Edge Hub. And then we've got the container that we're going to push. And then the routes. So very simple manifest, obviously all written in JSON, because JSON all the things. So specified in deployment, reported by device. You see now reported by device on that device is now a tick, because it's been reported. If we go down to this here now, we do a list. That's still being provisioned, right? And that's all cool. We'll let it. So the fact that the list is now taking a little bit longer means that it's doing some provisioning. So essentially, I haven't done anything on device. What I've done is I've managed the device in the cloud, and it's pushed the stuff down, and we can see that it's provisioning the stuff as we expect it to do. So essentially what will happen eventually is this thing will install the hub as well, and it will start reporting, right? So the hub's there now, it's running. So if I go to Device Explorer, just click a refresh on that, we can see there's my Edge device that I created. If I go to data here and monitor, then fingers crossed, we should see some data coming through. If this works, right? So there we are, so data's now coming through. You'll have to take my word for it. What I can also do down on the device itself is I can look at the logs of this particular module. So if I do logs, module name, then I can see the data that's coming through, right? And it will just quite merrily tick away as it's doing it. So we'll just stop that just for now, because we need to move on and do some more interesting things. So that was a module that had been written for us. So how do we go about doing our own? Well, first off, I want to show what that module was. So let's just quickly go over here. So this is that module that I've just downloaded the code for. It's just freely available on GitHub. So again, just to hammer home the point, we can see if we wander through here, we've got things that look very familiar to the normal device client process that you would normally go through with just a regular IoT device. So we've got twinning, we've got setting desired property callbacks, we've got method handlers, we've got what happens when a message arrives. And then in the simulation data, we've got a send event async event. So all of those things, if you're used to using IoT Hub generally, they would be all very familiar. So the idea, of course, with all of that is that you can just pick this stuff up and run with it. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new one. So here's a brand new open and empty Visual Studio Code. And just to prove that there's no smoke and mirrors involved, let me just go to my folder. So no smoke and mirrors. And the other thing is just to check very quickly from a no smoke and mirrors perspective. If we just go back to my resource group back here, I've got a container registry. And if I look at my repositories, obviously I don't have anything because I've not started creating anything yet. So I mentioned that Visual Studio Code already has some great tooling for this. If you install the, let's just have a quick look at the extensions. If you install, there's various extensions that are useful. So CLI tools, of course, IoT Edge, the toolkit itself, which allows you to interact with the IoT Hub, and then there's also the Docker one. So if you install those things and the Azure account, you'll be all set to go to really start riffing on this stuff. So let's go back here. If we just go up to our command palette up here, we can see that we can create a new Edge solution. I've already selected my IoT Hub. If we go down here and just click a refresh, there's my device. So if I choose IoT Hub solution or IoT Edge solution, did I select that? I did. So it's going to ask me where I want to chuck it. So I'll just go back to that folder that I was showing you that was all empty. There we go. I'm going to call this anomaly check for reasons that will become clear when you see the code. Anomaly check. So this has picked up the various options in terms of what project I'm going to create, and we can see right down here I can create an Azure function for deploying to the IoT Edge, right? But that's actually not what I want. Where's my other one? Just 1 second. Oh, big one is because I'm creating a function. Big one. Yeah. So that's how I want to create an Azure function. Sorry, I thought I was creating my own module. I'm going mad for a second there, so apologies. But yeah, so I'm creating an Azure function, which is called the same name as well. Anomaly check. So what it's doing is, what this is doing now is it's saying, okay, well, when I create this, where do I push my container? So I can push it locally because obviously I'm running Docker locally. You need to be running Docker locally because you need to be running the tool sets because Visual Studio Code leverages the tool set. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck this up to my container registry, which I just happen to know is called that. So let me just paste that in there. So I'm going to create that. And then off it goes. It goes and runs, just essentially runs the template and brings in the code that it wants to bring in. So we'll just let it do that very quickly. And whilst it's playing around doing that, if we just go back to IoT Edge here, just make sure that everything is reporting nicely. IoT Edge, IoT Edge. Down here, we should hopefully see everything is now running, which it is. Good. So it's specified in deployment and it's reported by the device and the runtime status is running. So we're good to go there. So if we go back to our solution here, we can see a few things. First one is this, I'll go through them in the interesting order, is this modules section, which has got an Edge Hub trigger, and it's created some code for us. So this is obviously just boilerplate code, which will just receive a message and pass it on. I won't do anything else. But again, in the interest of fun and not me having to code too heavily, here's some code that was written by somebody else earlier. So we'll just put that in there. And essentially, what we're doing is we're passing in a message. If you remember what the message was, we can see a message has got a machine, it's got a temperature, and it's got an ambient temperature and pressure as well. So essentially what we're doing is we're just taking that message, we're checking whether the value of the machine temperature is greater than this 25 threshold. And if it is, we'll pass the message on and add a property to it. If it's not, then we'll just pass the message on, right? So that's basically what it's doing. The other thing we need to do is configure how we're going to deploy this. So again, this looks familiar to that manifest that you saw earlier on. So you can see here, there's the routes, there's the things that I'm going to be sending up. So we already know that we're doing a temperature sensor. This is obviously just a template, the IoT hub and the Edge agent. But what I also need to do is I need to configure this so as it knows the username and the password of where to put my code, or my container when I put it in. So I'll just go and grab those very quickly. I'll just grab the password because that's something I can't remember. This password will, of course, change because this is a recording. So let me just put that in there. And that just needs to be the user, which is that. Right, so that's all good. We'll save all those files. But because this uses the tooling that underlies Docker, the other thing that I need to do is I need to essentially use the Docker engine locally to log on to my Azure registry. So for that, I'm going to open up my command palette, my terminal rather. And again, because in the interest of expediency, here's one I created earlier. So I'm just going to log in to my my container registry with that particular user, and I'm just going to grab that password again. So login succeeded. So essentially what I've done is I've created some code. Trust me when I say I created it, I didn't really, I just covered it, but I've created some code and I've set up some kind of configuration process which tells the Docker engine what to do when it builds the code. So the next thing I need to do, of course, is build the code. So first things first, because I'm humongously paranoid, I'm just going to save again, even though I didn't change them. The amount of times I've fallen into that trap. And my mouse has gone to sleep. So next thing I do, right mouse click here, and you can see here, build IoT Edge solution. So let's just do that, build IoT Edge solution. And you can see what it's doing is, well, we'll go back up there for that, but you can see that it's running a Docker build followed by, you can't quite see it, a Docker push, right? So, okay. That doesn't seem to have done the push. So it looks like they've changed this. So it now says build and push. So that's actually changed. So there you go. The notes that I made yesterday have already changed. That's how quick these things change. So what this is doing, of course, is dragging down the bits that it needs and then pushing back up to create a container. So we'll just, whilst it's busily doing that, because I'm at the mercy of our internet connection, what I'll do is I'll go back to the device settings here and just move across, and we'll just talk very quickly about deployments. So, oops, wrong one. So you remember I mentioned that what you don't want to have to do is manage an entire fleet of devices individually. Well, that's what IoT Edge deployments are about. So what I could do, okay, we're obviously struggling with connectivity here, so apologies, let's just try that again. Fingers crossed it will read it this time. Okay, let me just try again. Damn you, demo gods. I can imagine Wagner is laughing right now. Right, so If we go to IoT Edge, let's trust access ready this time. What I can do is I can go into here. I can go to my device twin. And I could put in here all manner of things, but say I put in tags. Oops, spot my hand-fistedness. Tags, location, Perth. Oops. Right, save. Interestingly, the thing is in the way there, but we'll muscle on. So if I then go back to my deployment here, just go back here, right, add edge deployment, and give it a name, nice deployment, and then I can step through. Oh, spot the obvious mistake. Nice deployment. And of course, in here I can set container registry settings where my deployment modules may be coming from. I can also add modules in much the same way as I would normally do. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm building up essentially the profile of what constitutes a particular device. Let's leave that for blank right now. I can set up the routes, of course, as well, as we'd expect. Any metrics that I want to get from the device as well. And then if I've remembered how to do this correctly, then I can put in here tags.location equals Perth. Oops. Perth. And we can see that it's picked up that device because that's what I tagged it as. So you can imagine that I could tag these devices by location, by particular type, and I could essentially stamp my entire fleet of devices very simply through this mechanism of just creating very, very simple, essentially scripts which send the data out. So I won't do that right now, but hopefully in the meantime, with all that talking, it will have pushed my digest, and it has. So heading back to the resource group here. Yeah, go away. Right. Edge demo. If we look at my container registry now, we would expect, if everything's been kind, to see now a repository. And there it is, fantastic. So we could now go onto the device in the portal and provision that to the device. But what we can also do is we can also do that from Visual Studio code instead. So once we've got everything configured, what we'll find is that, if we go up to this config here, that we've now got a deployment file. So this deployment file is essentially a copy of that same deployment template that we had down here. And if we go to our specific device, right mouse click this, we can see create deployment for a single device, because I'm just doing it for a single device. If we then go into here, we can see the deployment, and then very quickly we just click select, and it says start and succeeded. Now that was very, very quick, obviously, and it was very, very quick because essentially all it's doing is pushing that manifest, because remember, we've already pushed the Docker container. So that container already exists. So this is just pushing up that manifest. And if we go back up to our device up here, where are we? Edge. So I think I'll probably about another 5 minutes, hopefully. So we see the module count is now 4 instead of 3. If we look down at the modules, we can see the anomaly check there. It's specified in the deployment. It's not been reported yet. But if we go down to our device and just reissue that list, then eventually when this runs, hopefully because it's taking a bit of time, that means it's being provisioned onto the device, and we should see that there. So in the interest of time, whilst that finishes doing, what I'll do is I'll add another module. So this module is going to be a stream analytics module. So there we go. Let's just come back. So it's still saying failed. So I'm guessing that's Just going to come back very soon, because remember these things are set to auto start. So there you go. So that's provisioned and running. So that's good. So if we were to look at the routing for that, then what we would see, so if you just go down to the bottom here, is we're saying that things that come out of module temperature sensor, outputs temperature output, is going to go into my brokered endpoint for my function. So that's inputs. And if we actually look at the function code here, we can see that I've got an input called input and an output called output one. And simply put, those are just reflected in the routes. Outputs is saying output star. So it's basically saying anything that's an output sent to upstream. So I won't bother showing that right now, because in the interest of time, we'll just get on. So we'll go back up here and we'll say set modules. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a Stream Analytics module. So how do we do that? Well, when we create a new Stream Analytics job, so we'll just do Stream Analytics job. Create. Then you'll see you've got hosting environment, either cloud or the edge. So I created one earlier, just in the interest of expediency. So what I did is I created this one called average temperature. Come on, Paul, be kind. So the difference between this and a normal Stream Analytics job is kind of around the inputs and the outputs. It's a bit more than that, but if we were to go to the inputs, when I add a stream input, the only thing that I've got is IoT Edge, and that's the same with the output, it's IoT Edge. So essentially what this is doing is it's creating an ingestion point for inbound data, and obviously a point for sending data out with the outputs. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying, okay, well, if I'm sending something into an input point called temperature, I'm going to group by a 30-second tumbling window, and if the average temperature over that 30-second window is greater than 70 degrees, I'm going to create a command called reset and send it to my output called alert. So that's basically what that's doing. You'll notice down here there's an IoT Edge settings as well, and essentially all that is a storage account, because it creates a few things in the storage account when it provisions it. But if you go back to our device, I'm aware that I'm going to be running maybe 5 minutes over, so apologies for that. But we'll just move on very quickly. So if we go back to my device here, go back to my modules, I'm going to add that module. And there's a key difference between the Stream Analytics module and normal modules, which I'll get to when we get to the manifest. So if I do add Stream Analytics, choose my sponsored one, there's my Edge job, click save. What that's doing is it's going to that job, and essentially it's configuring a very specific module. Now, if you think about functions and you think about your own modules, what they do is they run as individual units of compute. That's not actually true of the Stream Analytics job. The Stream Analytics job runs as an individual module, so it's just a single module that is configured to run a very specific query, obviously a Stream Analytics query. And that's where that storage account comes in, because it stores the information to do with that, right? So if we just scooch down here, we can see that we've got my average temperature. Go next. Here's my routes. That's what's already configured. I'm going to choose a whole bunch of brand new routes, and we'll just talk through these once I've copied them in. So you can see here what I'm doing. The first one here is just saying, okay, we'll send all of my info into my brokered endpoint for my average temperature. So the average temperature was the name of the module that I created for my Stream Analytics. I'm going to send my alerts to reset. So inputs control. So if we were to look at our temperature sensor, it's going to have essentially a command that it's going to be looking for, which is called control, and it will receive that command. We don't really have much time to look through that. I'm going to send the messages up to the cloud. I'm going to send all of my other messages up to the cloud as well. I'm also going to send my stuff into the telemetry, into the temperature, the anomaly check to do that. Is it greater than 75? And send those messages up to the cloud as well. So that's essentially the routes. So I'm going from my sensor into ASA. I'm going from my sensor into functions. And the output of all of that is going up to the cloud. Some of those messages are also being returned to the device. So if you have a look at the manifest, what we'll see if we go down here is the various things that we've already got. Now we'll see the stream analytics module just here. And if we go down here, we'll see that there's actually, because this is all properties, okay, so we'll see that there's actually some properties for the average temperature module. So we're setting desired properties on that average temperature module. So that's a bit different to the other ones there, because we don't have module twin settings normally, but the module twin settings are there because the actual module that is running, which is the stream analytics module, is a singular module. So we're configuring that module because we can download it multiple times and just configure it individually each time. So we click submit. On the home stretch now, once this is done, we just make sure that everything works, right? So that's now set. We can see that we've got a bunch of modules. If we go back to our device down here and just do a list again, that's taking a bit of time to come through. Whilst we're waiting for that to come through, we'll just IoT Edge logs, and we'll just have a very quick look at that anomaly check module, because we didn't look at that. And we can see that there's, so this is just normal sort of function output that we would normally expect to see. And we can see that we're seeing received and transferred a message with temperature above the threshold, because that's what our code said we would do. So if we look back at our code here, we can see that it's there. That's good. And then eventually, if we just quit out of that and then just go back to our list, so the average temperature is now there as well. And if we were to go up to our monitor again, so we'll just clear this. So this is monitoring messages that are coming in, obviously, into IoT Hub. Then hopefully, if it's been running long enough, if it's not, we'll just leave it running whilst we carry on. So there's messages coming in, and remember this, the stream analytics job is running every 30 seconds. I think the machine temperature is already well and truly in breach, so that's good. So eventually we'll get a message in there that says that it's a command coming from stream analytics to say that it's, oh, in fact, there it is, right? So we've got command reset. Remember we had reset was the select reset as command. So there we are, we've got that message coming in from stream analytics. So that all seems to be working, so that's good. So that kind of concludes the demo really. So just very quickly, what I went through there was its own module. So obviously the temperature sensor, that was just a very simple module that we downloaded, which is just sending telemetry data. An anomaly check, which is an Azure function. So we've got a C# module, an Azure function module. Just one second, let's go back there. Shouldn't click that. An Azure function module and a stream analytics module. So the one that we're missing there, obviously, is machine learning. If you want to see about machine learning one, then I strongly urge you, shameless plug, to come along to YAO Connected in Melbourne next month, where I'll be doing a presentation that will use machine learning, use computer vision on the edge. So if you can come along to that, definitely do so, and I'll definitely buy you a beer. But other than that, really, we've just done a very quick blast through what IoT Edge is and how it's configured, including how you can essentially push a bunch of stuff to a bunch of devices from the cloud. So we'll just very quickly go back to the deck, and we're kind of virtually there now, because really the only other thing to say there is that there's a bunch of docs already available, and really the whole purpose of that demo was really just to rush through the tutorials that are already there. So I've been through them many times, which I can do them in half an hour. But I strongly urge, if you really want to have a play around with Edge, go there, play around with the modules. They've actually just updated, or play around with the tutorials. They've actually just updated all the content for the machine learning one as well. So that's all good. So that's all up to date as well. So please do urge you very strongly to go and have a play with this. And with that, I think I'm pretty much done. So with that, I'll head back over to or Bill, if you want to grab back presenter, and I'll shut up. Yeah.
So you're seeing my screen just with the slide on it?
We are, yes.
Yep.
Says thanks.
Yes. So thank you everyone for attending tonight, and if there's any questions, you can type them in the question window. If not, we'll finish it up, and I will have the recording of the of tonight's up in a couple of days' time. So thank you, Martin, for presenting tonight, and we will see everyone the second Thursday of next month.